Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Fabiola Franco. Today we'll be talking about the effects of stress among college students and how it's changed over the years. Our guest for today is CSUN's Director of University Counseling Services, Dr. Mark Stevens. Dr. Stevens is a clinical psychologist and has been working at the University Counseling Center since the early 80s. So Dr. Stevens, let's begin with the recent study that was released in late January by UCLA researchers saying more college freshmen are feeling more overwhelmed and more stressed. 62% say the recession has affected them, and students are also having lower emotional reserves to deal with the stress. So first and foremost, Dr. Stevens, what is stress?
Well, different people will describe stress quite differently. Some will talk about stress, feeling it in their body, a type of tightness that they have. Some will describe it as a little bit more worry, so they're having a hard time focusing or they're having a hard time enjoying. In reality, we all have stress. We need some kind of stress, but when stress gets a little bit too high or too prolonged over time, then there's some results that occur that aren't very enjoyable for the individual person. They may lose sleep, they may have more doubts, they may get sick a little bit more, and they just may not be able to enjoy some of the things that they normally enjoy. So
those are some of the basic points that are pointing to stress, right?
Yes.
Most importantly, what causes stress?
Yeah. Well, again, it's probably going to be different depending on who you are, your background, your age, your sex, your cultural background, and what kind of environmental stressors are going on. But typically, what causes stress is some sense that the person has that they're not able to take care of business, that they don't feel like they have access to the resources that they need to take care of business. So when we're talking about college students, most of the stress has to do with something that's going on in their life that may affect their academics.
Okay. And I actually was able to step out into CSUN's campus and interview some students as to what they think causes stress.
Yeah.
So let's take a look.
Okay.
There's a lot more stress about money, definitely a lot more stress about having to take classes or not being able to take classes. In my experience, I haven't been able to get into all the classes that I've wanted to, so that's very stressful.
Well, I can tell you why I'm stressed is because I have 4 to 5 different classes, and I have about 3 in one day, 2 in the other, and I'm just steady studying, getting this paperwork done.
I think scheduling, they have to work, go to school, pay for school. They have more to worry about than they did probably when they were in high school, so it's more of a change.
So you work with students on a daily basis. Is this pretty much some of the common reasons that they're stressed out about school?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think, there's a little bit more pressure now. I think that students feel about types of grades that they're going to get, what their future is going to look like. It used to be, back in the day, when you sort of knew that if you graduated college, the world is open for you. There's going to be jobs that are going to be open for you. It's going to make a big difference in your life. And now I think students are putting a lot of energy. They're making some compromises to their life, but they're not sure that the carrot's going to be there like it was maybe 20 years ago.
Right, right. Do you think recent budget cuts and, well, like you said, fear of no jobs definitely comes into play?
Yeah, the economy definitely does. I think, many of our students here at Northridge come from a background where they're worried about the economics of their family, that they're worried about the economics with their parents. Maybe one lost a job or is making less money, and they're coming from a type of family background or culture where that's a type of stress for them. Some of the students feel they're obligated to contribute to the family, and they actually use part of their financial aid package to try to contribute to the family, and then they're feeling a little bit more stressed because they have less money.
Right. And why is stress considered a problem?
Well, again, it's a certain type of stress and how long it's prolonged for. So, for example, if someone says to me they're not stressed out about finals, I'm a little bit worried about them. There has to be some kind of stress. It's connected. It's a motivator. It's not a bad thing. It's sort of like this bell-shaped curve. If you have a little bit, you know, not enough of it, it's not very good. But if you have too much of it, then it's also not very good as well.
And do you know how well students, I mean, you see students every day, do you know how well they deal with it?
You know, some come with a history of being able to have a game plan for dealing with stress. Some of those things are that they have a regular exercise pattern. They eat regularly. Maybe they've developed some study skills where they're not procrastinating, so there's not this sort of ongoing anxiety. Some of them have good sleep patterns. But also we see that students that perhaps aren't taking care of some of the physiological stress through exercise or amount of sleep, then they're a little bit more in a position to feel even more stress.
Okay. How can you tell if a person is too stressed out?
Well, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, you know, and that's a real good question. You don't sort of want to assume because someone looks like they're not, you know, shaking, or they don't look like they're really nervous, that it doesn't mean that they're not feeling stress. Gender-wise, it's really interesting. Guys have learned to be able to hide their stress more than women do, because to be stressed is sort of not a manly thing to do. Women in our culture are able to express themselves a little bit more and might show their anxiety or their tears or their fears. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're more stressed than the guys, but typically from a clinical perspective, we're looking at sleep, eating, amount of substance abuse, cigarette smoking, agitation, ability to concentrate and focus when they're studying or when they're in class. And those are some of the typical sort of symptoms that we see that says if it's been prolonged that stress is interfering with their lives.
And is there a common link between stress and illness?
There's a lot of research to suggest that if your body is activated over long periods of time, that it compromises your immune system. Also, when people are stressed out, they might do some behaviors that aren't good for their physical health, where they're not getting enough sleep, maybe they're using too much alcohol, they're not eating a nice balanced diet, so that again sort of compromises their immune system, and there might be more susceptibility to getting sick. And
that's perfect, because students have, as I went out and interviewed students, they both have positive and negative ways to deal with stress.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at what CSUN students have to say about that.
I know a lot of people like music. You know, they just like to zone out. Maybe surfing the internet. I know sometimes you need to take a break from homework. You just go on Facebook, you know.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of students are relying on drugs and alcohol and recreational drugs and whatnot to cope with the stress. I mean, I would hope that they would get therapy. I know we offer that here at school, but I know personally a lot of my friends do rely on things like that or food to cope with stress.
So Dr. Stevens, a lot of the students I spoke to off camera were telling me that their way of coping with stress is, you know, partying, having drugs, having sex. What are your thoughts about that?
It does take away some of the stress, but it's a very temporary takeaway. It's something that doesn't really last, and in fact, some of those behaviors end up causing more stress. Alcohol, for example, is a depressant, so you might feel good while you're drunk, but then afterwards your body is digesting it as a depression. You might do some things that temporarily feel really good, but then you have to live with the consequences afterwards. And sometimes living with those consequences can be stress producing.
Right.
I think, you know, what the students said that I think is key is a couple things, is finding some ways to deal with stress that can be part of sort of a lifelong learning pattern. So things like listening to music is great, meditation, good conversations. And to a certain extent, I understand that the gaming that goes on or surfing the internet can be very relaxing, but if they're becoming addicted to it and they're not doing their studies because of it, then all the sort of impact of the, oh, it's nice to chill out, becomes more stress because they're procrastinating on their studies.
So Dr. Stevens, we're going to be taking a short break, and we'll be right back.
My mama always said, life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're gonna get.
Lions, tigers, bears. Oh my! Hakuna bina kanjanda.
Then let me take gatio kako.
How you feel? How you feel?
I'm feeling good. Spin me, spin me.
Gotcha.
Oh, goodness. Oh.
There's a place not so far away. Ask your parents to take you. Come to the forest, where the other you lives. But first, stop by discovertheforest.org.
And how can problem solving help students deal with anxiety?
Well, that's a real good question. And I think coming up with a game plan that allows the student to take some ownership about where their life is and say, what can I do differently? And it may not have to be something gigantic. It can be just sort of small steps to be able to say, where do I have control over my life and what choices will I make? So for example, what I see a lot with students is terrible sleeping patterns. You know, they say they're going to go to sleep at 11, but they're on the internet surfing, and before you know it, you know, that internet time, it becomes 2 o'clock. They've got to wake up for a class that's 8 o'clock. They didn't get enough sleep. They're tired, and then it becomes sort of a vicious circle there. So just making a choice to say, you know, I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep, like our grandmothers used to tell us, or our mothers used to tell us, is really actually very good advice to be able to ward off some of the natural stress that happens just being a college student.
Right. And for those students who want to deal with it in a positive way,
Yeah.
is there any professional help they can get here on campus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to work at a place on campus that, at the University of Counseling Services, and we have many workshops, and they're all free, that we do to help students deal with stress. We've got relaxation. We have actually a relaxation room at the Counseling Services, and we come and we teach the students some guided imagery exercises to do, helping them what I call building their relaxation muscle. We also have a mindfulness group that is a kind of technique that's been used more recently, but it's got some really long history in meditation that helps them become aware of when they're feeling stress and what to do. We have self-esteem groups. We actually have a group that's called anxiety management, and they're workshops. And we give kind of exercises how to deal with some of the stress or the anxiety.
So what can you tell us about the Blues Project and what you said, more peer counseling?
Okay. Well, the Blues Project is kind of a prevention project, and we train students to go out into the campus community to let them know about the counseling services and to let them know about signs of depression. Stress and depression are very much related. Sometimes if someone has been experiencing stress over a prolonged period of time, it can turn into a type of depression. So the Blues Project peer mentors or other students that have been trained, and they'll go into classrooms and talk with the students about some of the signs and symptoms of depression.
Can professors do anything to help?
Well, you know, in the counseling services, we go out a lot and we'll speak with the professors, do outreach to help them sort of identify students that they're interacting with, that they're concerned about, whether it's too much stress or depression or anxiety or something like that. And we coach the professors and the staff, because they're sort of the eyes and ears, to be able to have a gentle conversation with the student without blaming, to be able to say, you know, there's some resources on campus that can help you. We try to normalize the counseling services to our students. One of the ways that I like to identify counseling is to say something that you don't need to be sick to go to counseling, you just need to feel stuck.
Right. Okay. And what can friends do? What are some things that they shouldn't say to someone who is suffering from stress?
You're crazy, just get over it, get a grip on it. Don't be a weakling, everybody's going through this. You know, look at the bright side, look how good you have it compared to so-and-so. Those things just don't work. A friendly conversation works, trying to be able to relate to that person, and sometimes not trying to take away what they're feeling, but just listening. And sometimes people get better by just talking about it, because there's some shame that's connected with some of the thoughts. They think sometimes they're the only one that's going through this. And so a nice ear can be very healing.
So what would you say to students who are struggling to make life decisions at such a young age, as far as a career choice even?
Well, you know, I think that some students are worried that the decision that they make at this point, there's an absolutely right decision. And if they don't make that right decision, that the rest of their life is going to sort of fall apart. From my perspective, and living a few more years, is that, you know, life is a process, and there's going to be lots of different decision-making points. And if you worry too much about, am I making this absolutely right decision, that can be too stressful, because then you start to worry, did you make the right decision? Most of the time, my feeling is that life is a process, and if you do end up, quote, making the wrong decision, it just gives you an opportunity to look at what other options are out there for you that might work.
What are the most challenging things students have to change to lower their stress?
I would say better time management skills. I think that some of the things I talked about before in terms of the kind of habits of taking care of their body is really would be quite important.
Do you think a lot of students fall into the perfectionist trap nowadays?
I think that they worry about, again, making the wrong decision, and worrying about what other people think about them, and sometimes, you know, stressing out that if they don't get the A or the B+, that their life is going to be over, and to be able at times to get above that and just sort of think a little bit more about their life from a broader perspective in a little bit more of a balanced way.
Dr. Stevens, we're going to take another break, and we'll be right back.
My sadness and depression grew out of giving myself to my career before I would give myself to myself.
I didn't want to tell my parents. I really didn't want to tell anybody, and I didn't. I shut down.
Giving voice to what you're feeling is part of the healing.
The healing is in me and can also be extended to others.
If you're strong enough to just open your mouth, that's all it takes.
Hi, I'm Terry Williams. Can I tell you that it is way past time for us to come face to face with the issue of mental illness in the Black community? Time for us to stop hiding it behind closed doors. Share ourselves. Healing starts with us.
Have you ever considered, I don't know, getting it waxed?
Waxed?
Yeah.
Bro, that's a little weird.
I don't know. Doesn't seem that weird to me.
Just keep shaving my back, okay? Oh, dude, can I get a bite?
What? With my spoon? It's disgusting.
If you don't talk to your kids, I will.
So let's kind of take it to a different direction. Let's talk about cultural expectations. Okay. You know, the tiger mother controversy, the stereotypes of certain cultures pressuring more than others. Yeah. Do you often see this with students?
Well, definitely culture has an impact. Some of the pressures that they feel. I know that you know, students that are here and have immigrant parents, that there's some expectation. It may not even be a verbal expectation from the parent that they ought to be really successful, and parents have made some sacrifices to come here, and to be in college is just absolutely gigantic, and they better be successful. Some of them are the first in their family to go to school, to go to college, I should say, and they're bragged a lot about outside, and when they're starting not to do as well, they sometimes are so ashamed of that that they don't tell their family and they don't tell others, and they sort of live in this worry of, I'm going to really disappoint my family.
So how do parents contribute to the stress, and how can they help them kind of release the stress?
Well, I mean, ideally, some conversations before their son or daughter goes away to college is really important. You know, parents are unfortunately a little too concerned still about grades, so that when they have these conversations with their children, it's really not like an adult to adult, how are you doing, what's going on, but the parents bring in a kind of worry, and so, are you doing your homework, how did you do in this test? And that only sort of magnifies what's already going on for the student already. They're worried about their homework, they're worried about their test scores, and to have that reminded by their parents isn't really doing any good. It's not like motivating them, oh, I'm going to do good. Yeah, I didn't think about that test, or I didn't think about that homework. They don't need that kind of energy. And oftentimes that energy is just coming from the parents' anxiety and worries, and they end up projecting that onto their children.
And you said diet and exercise plays a big part in releasing the stress.
Yeah.
So what would you say, like in a common day, what should a person do? Is what they eat, is what they...
Well, I think to be thoughtful about what they're putting into their bodies, and both kind of brain food and food that is going to create maximum energy, and to try to boost their immune system is really quite important. And a diet of Diet Coke and carbohydrates, potato chips, and some of that sort of fast food stuff isn't really good. So just thinking about sort of a balanced diet, and I like to think of students as sort of academic athletes, and thinking about, well, what do you need to do to feed your brain that's going to maximize your performance inside the classroom or when you need to do your homework. And there's tons of research to suggest, you know, what kinds of foods are going to maximize their ability to have energy and ability to focus. And I don't mean that they need to, you know, get real obsessive about everything that they're eating, but just think about it from a little bit of a balanced perspective.
From your experience, what age group experiences most stress?
You know what? I think that if you ask people, you know, starting at about age probably 11, they're going to say they're experiencing the most stress. Stress is very subjective, and people almost all the time feel like they're feeling stress. And so I don't think that there's like this hope that, okay, once I reach this age, I'm not going to feel any stress, because stress is different. Yeah, maybe you're not feeling the stress of academics, but then it may turn into money or may turn into family issues. But I think what we try to do for students is not so much saying that you're going to be able to eliminate stress. That's an unrealistic expectation. But we're going to try to empower students to think about building resources to be able to handle stress, and to be open as a lifelong learner that one needs to develop different techniques depending on what the stress is.
Right. And do you think these high levels of stress are part of modern life, or is it a part of a cycle that will eventually ebb?
You know, I think over time our culture has become tighter and more stressed. I think the sense of wanting things quickly, right away, I think technology, while there's some wonderful things about it, but just this whole texting and tweetering and email and Facebook and having to respond and get on things, I think our brains now are not kind of relaxing enough, and our world is becoming much faster, and I think it's going to catch up with us.
Lastly, what can we take from understanding about stress levels and being able to ease it? Final thoughts.
Well, I think it's something that needs to start discussed in elementary school. I think there needs to be prevention programs for parents to help them relax a little bit and not start thinking about what child care school their kid needs to be in order to get into the best college. I think students need to, at an early age, start to think about developing stress management or relaxation plans, because I don't think the world is going to get any easier as we move on.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Stevens. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have. I'm Fabiola Franco for On Point.